Abdirahim, welcome. So welcome everybody. I'm welcoming you to track one. So we're talking about volunteering locally, increasing participation of refugees and migrants locally through volunteering. So as I said, my name is Stephen Shashra, and I'm ably supported, co-facilitated with Atala, who I'll give a chance to introduce himself more robustly in a minute, as well as Amanda. Amanda is taking care of our friends online, who hopefully they can see me through that camera behind you. Because this is a hybrid event, I hope that you appreciate some of the bugs you must get through, especially in the beginning. So for a lot of the questions, I'd love to bring it to the online participants first to ask, and then we'll bring it to the room. So we're together for the next 2 days. And today is primarily about knowledge, understanding, mapping, use both. Understanding, mapping, volunteering in the different countries we belong to, and particularly the integration of migrants and refugees through volunteering. So we're looking at what are the barriers. And I'm gonna ask our friend with the slides. But first, let's see who's in the room. Allow me to introduce myself again. My name is Stephen Shashra. I'm a co-director of the Caravanserai Collective. I'm based here in wonderful Lisbon and really happy to welcome you here. And I'm originally from Montreal, Canada. And my favorite dessert has to be, on my travels to Indonesia, I found this fruit called a mangosteen, which blew my mind. So mangosteen it is. I'll pass it on to Atala.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Atala Fitzgibbon. I work as the Faith and Partnerships Advisor at Islamic Relief Worldwide, and our secretariat is in the UK. And I'm pleased to be trying to support Stephen and Amanda today, making notes and other things.
Hello, we have to use these two microphones so everybody can hear us there online and here in the room. My name is Amanda Figueras. I'm working for Abdirahim, which is an association for interfaith and intercultural dialogue. I'm based in Madrid, and I was born in Barcelona, and I'm from Spain, let's say. My favorite dessert is rice with milk, which is very sweet. I'm going to pass the microphone with the help of anyone who could please help me.
Just one is enough. Left or right. So I'm Ibrahim Mogra. This time I'm here with my Religions for Peace UK hat on. I'm based in Leicester, originally from Malawi, and my favorite dessert is caramel pudding.
Hi, everyone. Oh, that was loud. I'm Abdirahim. I am originally from Somalia, but I'm based in Finland for the last 27 years. I represent an organization called Moniheli. It is an organization of migrants together. I don't have a favorite dessert. I could eat a lot of, well, it always works. Yeah, let's just say ice cream this time.
Hello, everyone. My name is Isabel. I am here representing Miru Abrir Caminho, in English, Miru Open Path, Open the Way. We are based in Porto, so we are from Portugal, but not here in Lisbon, in the north. And I am from the north of the country, a little village called Barcelos. Just for you to know what Miru does in a quick description, we try to create communities in the north of the country where refugee families are welcomed, communities through dialogue and proximity. And our main goal is to create true bonds of affection and friendship between local people and refugee families. And my favorite dessert, it's a difficult question, but I think it's, I don't know if you know the banoff pie with banana. It's really good. So I chose that one.
This work? Okay. Can I take my mask? My words, you'll hear me with this. My name is Farhad. I am from Iraq, from a community called Yazidi. It's an ethno-religious minority that genocide committed against us in 2014 by the organization so-called Islamic State. I'm recently a refugee in France. I'm a founder and president of an organization called Voice of Yazidis. It's the organization that advocate and defend the fundamental right of my community and myself as a survivor of the genocide. My community is now, majority are displaced or even kidnapped or reduced to sexual slaves, to schools of being brainwashed by radicals. And then we are the main stable one from my community are actually the refugee in Europe. But then we are going to hear a lot of troubles and challenges with us too. We are the top stabilized one within this community.
Favorite dessert?
Tarte citron.
Lemon tart.
Yes, I love it. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I'm Elena. I am based in Rome and I am from Rome. I left the organization like at the end. I am the senior program manager of the John Paul II Center for Interreligious Dialogue, but I'm here because I volunteer for within a project of socialization of young Muslims and young refugees in Rome. And I take care specifically about the interreligious meetings between these young people. My favorite dessert is strudel. And I'll pass it. Oh, you do that?
Hi, everybody. My name is Robert Templer. I'm the program director at KAICIID. So I work running all of our kind of external activities, if you like. I live in Barcelona, but our offices are in Vienna. I just joined recently and I haven't fully moved to Vienna, so I commute back and forwards between Barcelona and Vienna. I'm Irish, but I grew up all over the world. So I spent relatively little time in Ireland, unfortunately. Favorite dessert? I think that would have to be probably rice pudding. That's a very boring choice, but you can find it everywhere in the world as well. Which is
cinnamon.
good. Yeah.
It's very, very good. Thank you all. I'm hungry. Now we're going to go online. We're not going to, sure, if you'd like, but we're going to go online to our friends who are online to introduce themselves. Can we put the screen to introduce themselves. Yeah. So Lawrence first.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry not to be with you in person, but it's nice to be joining you at least virtually. I'm Lawrence Robinson. I work with the Global Refugee Sponsorship Initiative, which is a multi-stakeholder partnership. I work on the part of the University of Ottawa Refugee Hub. I'm based in Berlin, Germany. I'm originally from the UK, from the southwest of England. And I would say I would join someone in the audience and say my favorite dessert is also a lemon tart.
So Lawrence is going to give you the floor. Oh, we can't hear anything.
Yeah, I can hear you now. Sorry. I couldn't hear you for a second, but I'm coming through now. Yeah, thank you.
Lawrence is going to give you the floor. As you said, Senior Policy Coordinator at the Global Refugee Sponsorship Initiative. And 5 minutes and then 5 minutes Q&A. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the introduction. I hope you can hear me clearly. Yeah, so as I introduce myself, I'm Lawrence Robinson. I work with the Global Refugee Sponsorship Initiative. I work as the Senior Policy Coordinator, covering a number of countries, particularly around Europe. Perhaps I'll quickly explain what the Global Refugee Sponsorship Initiative is, just as an introduction. So the Global Refugee Sponsorship Initiative is a multi-stakeholder partnership led by the Government of Canada, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Open Society Foundations, the Justra Foundation, the Shapiro Foundation, and from our side, the University of Ottawa. The GRSI is mandated to encourage and support the establishment of community sponsorship programs around the world. We do this particularly by sharing Canada's history of private sponsorship, and we're still working to create new programs around the world. Particularly, there's a lot of growth in Europe currently, which I'll talk about a little bit today. But particularly in the context of this working level session, which I'm very grateful to be able to participate in, I'm going to focus on refugee sponsorship and how that intersects with volunteering, particularly the ways in which refugee sponsorship can be used as a tool to advance participation of refugees in their local communities. I had the fortune to read the input paper that was provided in advance. I'll touch on a few of those ideas, but I'll be particularly focusing on the ways in which sponsorship can be used as a tool to put some of those ideas into action to ensure welcoming environments for refugees, and so that refugees themselves become active participants in local communities, so they can become welcomers themselves, volunteers, and sponsors. So again, an important place to start is defining what I mean when I say community sponsorship. So community sponsorship programs work to empower groups of individuals to assume responsibility for the initial reception and integration of refugees arriving in communities through resettlement or via complementary pathways. It's important to distinguish it slightly from volunteering, from typical methods of resettlement and then integration, which often rely on resettlement agencies and then volunteer groups helping. Sponsorship enables direct responsibility from sponsor groups and individuals within those groups to take responsibility to help refugees integrate and settle. There's a lot of growth, particularly in Europe currently, in terms of sponsorship programs. There are sponsorship programs now in more than a dozen countries around the world, particularly in Europe. You have sponsorship programs from the UK to Germany, to the humanitarian corridors programs in Italy and France, programs in the Basque regions of Spain, and there are sponsorship programs now across 4 continents in the world. And we see faith-based groups playing a really leading role in almost all of those programs. So in terms of, as a starting point for today, I wanted to talk a little bit about the data we have on integration. Data shows, particularly from Canada and the UK, some of the most experienced programs so far, data shows that sponsored refugees have better integration outcomes than those arriving through traditional resettlement routes. This makes quite a logical sense because you have a support and network of individuals and groups, those in the local community that take a responsibility in helping those newcomers settle into their community. So we see integration often faster and more comprehensive. We see certain levels of economic self-sufficiency attained quicker, community supporting newcomers to become employed, start their own businesses. We see this in a number of countries. Income levels are typically higher. We have data from Canada on that. But then you also have other benefits, such as language acquisition, navigating the different bureaucracies, getting access to services a lot faster when you have those in the local community able to support. Then also logically, you also see a lot of strengthening social connections between newcomers and those in the local community. We see a lot more acceptance and awareness of cultural diversity. And we see this even from populations that are typically hesitant to welcome refugees into their community. Once they see the support of a local group, they have a lot more trust in that process. Now, entering into the main topic of today on volunteering, we see naturally with that link between sponsored refugees and then faster integration outcomes, we see sponsored refugees regularly becoming key parts of their community, not just limited to volunteering. But if we want to talk specifically about volunteering, we have stories from many countries, particularly across Europe, but also in Canada and increasingly in other countries such as Australia and New Zealand, of sponsors starting projects. They work in their local communities. They might volunteer with their local faith-based organization. We have stories, for example, from Germany of a Syrian girl who started her own gardening project. So really beautiful stories coming out of sponsorship as those programs grow. We also see in almost every context, sponsors, newcomers coming together for what we might call intercultural dialogue. So they might be, for example, in Ireland, there are examples of Syrian-Irish coffee mornings, people sharing meals, just as an opportunity for friends, neighbors. At this point, I think the idea in terms of refugee and newcomer and the welcomers and the sponsors becomes a lot more mixed. You just have people who are new neighbors coming together to share meals and talk with one and each other and learn. I think that's a really transformative aspect of community sponsorship. But more importantly, perhaps, or perhaps more practically, sponsorship is pretty unique in its aspect to enable former refugees to then take leading roles in the communities as welcomers, which I think is a pretty unique aspect of sponsorship programs. Refugees can become sponsors themselves. They can work with other sponsor groups, and we see this happen pretty regularly. Sponsored refugees obviously have been welcomed into a community. They understand and they see what their sponsors have done to welcome them, and then they want to often do this themselves. We have an example of this from Ireland. We have a video on our website that I can share the link to afterwards of a refugee called Angam Yunus, who regularly likes to share her experience of community sponsorship and is working to become part of a new sponsorship group herself. She was actually the first refugee sponsored into Ireland as part of that program. Additionally, from Canada, there's a unique aspect of the Canadian program that enables former refugees to name specific individuals that they would like to sponsor and welcome into their community. So that's a pretty unique aspect and can create a bit of an echo effect of sponsored refugees sponsoring another refugee, that refugee coming into the community and then wanting to sponsor other refugees afterwards. So sponsorship really does does allow for a very specific tool to enable refugees to become leaders in their community and welcome others in. And finally, this is an aspect that was pretty pronounced in the input paper that I thought was very strong, that refugees naturally, beyond sponsorship, play such a key role in settlement support generally. Welcoming is often best done by those that of a similar cultural background, those that understand the journey that has been made already and what it can be like to meaningfully integrate and get the services you need in a new community. The paper touched on two interesting concepts: this idea of bridging, of when refugees interact with their hosts in that community, and then this idea of bonding, when refugees meet with and interact with those of matching kind of national ethnic backgrounds. These are interesting concepts, but what sponsorship does is it enables us to kind of meet perhaps both, where it's not just this idea of a refugee coming in and being welcomed by a community of a different background, but you could have actually those of a similar background inside the sponsorship group or being the whole sponsorship group themselves. We see this happening, for example, in Canada, but also now in the UK, where those with language abilities are working within sponsorship groups to improve the integration process. And then finally, I'll just say broadly as important principles that we see in sponsorship and more broadly, it's just this idea of a whole of society approach. In sponsorship particularly, there are lots of different ways for different people to get involved, including refugees and migrants. There are also lots of different ways to contribute. Sponsorship allows for people to contribute through financial means, through emotional support, through volunteering or donating particular items. And yeah, just to also conclude, sponsorship is just one tool that I think is useful, but it wasn't mentioned in the paper, so I thought I would focus on that in particular. Yeah, very much looking forward to the rest of the discussion today. Really keen and to learn more from others and hear the discussion. I'm very happy to answer any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lawrence. That was great. What a great scheme, a great project. And as a Canadian, I've been hearing about it for since it started, and with such pride. So questions?
Thank you for the presentation, let's say. My question will be about if you have a statistic that you wrote, and you also mentioned that in France, you are working, you are involved in France. I would love to know more about this, if that's possible, and also if it's possible, let's be in contact, because we are really doing the same thing, but we are more for a specific group of refugee and asylum seeker, which is the survivors of genocide from Iraq.
Thanks, Lawrence. You could go ahead on that question, then we'll circulate again.
Great, yeah, thank you so much for the question. I'll maybe start with the first one. I know you asked for a couple of statistics, and so maybe most of the statistics we have are on, for example, integration outcomes, which maybe I'll mention here. But I mentioned a few improved integration outcomes through between privately sponsored refugees in Canada and those that come through that are government-assisted refugees. So, for example, we've seen in Canada, privately sponsored refugees tend to find employment faster. So employment rates in the first year are around 90% for men and 71% for women, which is substantially higher than those government-assisted refugees. 1 year after arrival, we also see the annual average earnings of privately sponsored refugees to be higher, around 23,000 Canadian dollars, versus the ones that come through government-assisted refugee programs around $20,000. So there's a slight gap there. We're also starting to see, as more data comes out from newer programs, as in the UK, similar statistics. And yes, I mentioned France. The French program is commonly known under the term of humanitarian corridors, which are also present in Italy, which are welcoming a substantial number of people that follow the same kind of principles of community sponsorship, in which there are sponsorship groups often coordinated through humanitarian organizations and also faith-based organizations to form welcome groups for those individuals. France also has some interesting projects called university corridors, which enable students to come into France, students of refugee backgrounds, to be welcomed then by other students, which I think is a pretty interesting innovation. Obviously intersects with volunteering as well, with students wanting to use their time and expertise in their local area, in their community, to welcome other refugee students onto their campuses. We're seeing this also increasingly now with the Afghanistan refugee crisis. Lots of communities across the world, particularly on campuses across the US, Canada, across Europe as well, wanting to sponsor and support those that they know, particularly. There are, for example, scholars at risk programs. But yeah, France has an interesting program and might well grow in the near future.
Thank you, Lawrence. Other questions? I have a question if nobody else does. But yeah.
Thank you. It's not strictly related to volunteering, but I have a doubt about sponsorship programs. So I will ask you something about the responsibilities of the sponsors, because I didn't get it if it's just if they just sponsor the program through their skills, they connect with the people that are welcoming, they network with the community, or if they really sponsoring financially. So, or if they don't do that, if the program is articulated with public funds, I didn't know where the money comes from. Sorry.
Would you like me to jump in on that now, or are we collecting questions?
There's one more question.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's actually just a language question. I heard you really dividing into sponsors and newcomers. I would like to hear more from you about this like linguistic choice. From what point? I mean, to me that sounded really interesting. I think I'm coming from the discussion well, not discussion, but during one of the plenary session, we heard about also this linguistic choice of terms, like not talking about, thinking if we can move from a sort of like beneficiaries and understanding. And I would really love to hear more about the language you use. Thank you.
All yours, Lawrence.
Thanks very much. Really interesting questions. So I'll start with the financial question. It's one that comes up really frequently. I think this idea, the word sponsorship often triggers a question around the finances, which is really important. I think so much of the idea around sponsorship stems from this idea that the amount of resources that governments often give to refugee protection can be very limited. So that can we really harness some of the resources that communities are willing to give to welcome refugees into their communities, which brings up an important financial question. Across programs around the world, we see a huge range of the amount of demands put onto sponsors. There are completely private sponsorship programs in which much of the burden for financially supporting newcomers is placed. But then if we look at, maybe I'll focus on European examples because that's the main geographic focus of this forum. We see quite a range. So just to give you a few numbers, in the UK, sponsors are asked to raise £9,000 as a flat rate, but it's also accompanied by regular government assistance for housing, access to services. In other countries, we see programs developing with very negligible financial commitments from sponsors. It could be very, very limited, in which sponsors are really just designed to serve as mentors or as welcomers, and not to actually provide financial resources to assist that. In that way, sponsorship provides a really flexible tool to enable those interested to work in different ways and contribute what they can. Equally, there's a range of different stakeholders you could call on, and that's why I think sponsorship is interesting. You could request support from the private sector. I touched on the work that universities can do, but also philanthropy. There are a lot of innovative funds that have been created over the years to provide guarantees to sponsors that want to do this, but don't necessarily feel like they have the financial ability to do so. So there are lots of different examples of how it can work, but at its core, sponsorship just allows ways for individuals who want to support to do so, and then they can work with governments, they can work with local authorities, they can work with private sector to see how that can happen. On the language question and the choice of words, I think it's a really important one, and I don't necessarily have any answers today, but just to describe maybe some of the words that I've been using. Sometimes we talk about refugees. I think it's important when we talk about refugees coming into local communities that they then become part of the community, and they're former refugees at that point. And we can talk about them as newcomers and new neighbors, and just to try to prevent this othering experience in which they always feel stuck to that identity of where they're coming from and why they fled. So that's the choice of language there on to use newcomer, which can equally apply to migrants and those that come from even within the country. So just this idea of a newcomer to a community, and it's not so important exactly where they come from. And then sometimes I also talk about welcomers more generally, and just to create welcoming communities, this idea that something is a positive aspect rather than always talking about sponsors or talking about volunteers. Volunteering, obviously, the emphasis is then on how that person is using their free time versus the idea of welcomers puts the emphasis on what someone is actually trying to do and what someone is trying to achieve in relation to those coming into their community. So I hope they find they prove to be terms that are suitable to the humanity in question.
Thank you, Lawrence. If I might take facilitator's prerogative, because we are moving towards policy recommendations, can you give us some of the barriers that you've seen for the scheme to develop as we would like? It seems like there's so much positive. What have you seen are the barriers to its spreading?
Yeah, there's a significant level of motivation for these schemes. Firstly, I'll note that they are growing at a really quick rate, particularly across Europe. I think the European Union has shown a lot of support for this, particularly recognizing this whole of society approach, the idea that you can mobilize communities, individuals, private sector, as well as states to contribute to different the needs to welcome refugees. There are also some innovations in how this could apply to those needing relocation, not just resettlement. So those are interesting. But there are, as we've already started to touch on, significant barriers. The financial one is a clear one. How do we actually mobilize resources fairly across a society that includes still contributions from the state, that doesn't put too much burden on particular sponsors? There was a review recently of the Australian program that seemed to put too much burden on sponsors in that country. But how do we also create programs that still motivate individuals and groups to do this? Because it is a significant responsibility. It does move slightly beyond what we would think of as volunteering. There are contracts in place. There is a responsibility to successfully help the resettlement experience of those coming into the community. That is incredibly challenging. And how do we do that and keep that motivation there? We often see people grow an interest in working in these, in particular peak moments and associated with certain crises. We saw this in response to the crisis in Syria. We see that again in the crisis now, but nonetheless, needs for resettlement remain really high and underfulfilled regularly. So how do we keep that motivation? How do we create programs that give people a sense that what they're doing is meaningful? There's a concept that comes up often is whether the places under sponsorship are additional to the existing resettlement quotas or not. Sometimes it's put forward that way, and that can be a positive motivating factor to sponsors as well. But there are significant barriers. But I think there is significant interest in this kind of in these new tools. But there are also organizations that feel reluctant and want to use existing tools. So I think it's about always just showing and coming up with new innovative methods and trying to find the time and the spaces to delivering them meaningfully. And that's why these spaces are always so important. So we have the time to discuss them.
Thanks so much, Lawrence. Please join me in thanking Lawrence for his contribution. There will be a chance to dialogue over this after our next speaker, but thank you, Lawrence. We're going to move it on to Abdirahim Hussein, who's Executive Director of Moniheli in Finland. Please.
Is it okay if I take this off? Yeah. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abdirahim. I think some of you were here when I was introducing myself. When I was doing this presentation, I was thinking, do I go first and explain the organization, or do I explain the topic itself? So I decided to take the topic first. And then maybe if I still have time after the 5 minutes time we were talking about, to do what we as organizations do. I think it's, yeah, thank you. On the side. Yeah, thank you. I see volunteerism to be one way of doing integration into our new countries. Majority of people come there. When they come there, they have no contacts with anyone. Maybe the only people they know are family members and stuff like that. They're doing a lot of things, and they wouldn't think that as a volunteer work. But I wanted to first explain what is the difference of volunteerism, because whenever I go to a different European country, I hear of volunteerism, but then people have different understanding of the word. In Finland, we have in my opinion, two kind of volunteerism. One is the recognized one, where you have the possibilities to really get a contract that really says that you're coming there to do volunteer work. There's the possibility of you, the organization or whatever you go, maybe compensate you some way or somehow. After you finish the job, you might even get a certificate to show that how dedicated you are, and that can really help you. This is given by organizations like the Red Cross, the Save the Children, UNICEF, and organizations like that. On the other hand, you have the unrecognized work, volunteer work. Let's say every service in Finland that exists is supposed to be offered by the city or by the government. So if you follow your mother and help her through the process of getting her passport in the police and stuff like that, working as a translator, that's counted as volunteerism. So helping family members, helping your own community, doing translation here and there, all of that really are counted as volunteer work. And I remember in 2015, the government wanted to make sure that nobody is passive, that everybody has to be activated, and that people had to kind of showcase how active they were. And people started to really ask, like, okay, if I am then volunteering, can all of this work count? And they were saying that if you can document them, if you can count them, if you can count the hours and stuff like that, yes, then they will be counted as like activism. So where are people doing volunteerism? In our organization, which is called Moniheli, we do a lot of issues with employment network in studying, housing, and also the volunteerism itself, that people don't understand what it means, that we do some kind of workshops to make people understand what it means, what can be done, how it can be done, and then how can we also do it in a way that it's measurable, that we can put hours and show that this is how much work we have done through volunteerism. So in organizations like one of our member organizations now has decided, it's a Syrian organization, they have decided that because we can't get the Arab community or the Russian speaking community or the Estonian community to take the vaccination, one way of really getting people to understand why it's important is that they use their own premises. They ask the vaccinators to come there, and then they are promoting and stopping Arab-speaking people on the streets. Like, do you get vaccinated? No, why not? Ask the question, bring them to their premise, and people are getting vaccinated. And now we are getting to those numbers. This is like a very tangible way of doing that. So since I have less than 3 minutes, about the organization that I am the CEO of at the moment, it's Finland's largest multicultural organization. We have over 120 members and growing. Just this year, about 16 new organizations have joined. We're talking about over 40 nationalities are part of this organization. We reach about 1 million people per year in Finland, a number, even though the migrants community in Finland are about 500,000, like 500,000 people. But we reach 10,000 people per week at least, through our different social medias and our medias and stuff like that. And that's how we get to work with these people. We worked to integrate the migrants to Finnish society, but as we believe that integration is not a one-way street, it's a two-way street, which means that the new Finland with migrants and different kind, that also the Finnish people have to integrate to this new Finland. So this is a concept that I hope also the rest of you guys have thought of, because Europe is changing, it's not what it used to be, and this new norm. So I remember a couple of, it was an Arab guy and a West African guy really saw a Finnish man and they were like, he is too Finnish for multicultural Finland. So this was a Finnish man they were looking at and saying that he doesn't understand the new Finland. So what we aid is we try to bring migrants with the Finns to work together and kind of make sure that they have things that they can work on. And last but not least, where do we work on capacity building? When we talk about migrants, people talk about migrants in one way, according to different statistics. The number one reason why people come to Europe or the Western world is, I'm not talking about now the last 5 years when we have so many wars, but I'm talking before that. People come for family reunion, love, family reunification. Number two was to study, to work. And number three was refugee, why people were coming. But even though those other numbers are bigger than this one, but nevertheless, whenever we talk about migrants, we talk about refugees. And then specifically, we talk about Muslim refugees and why they're here and what they're doing. So they do a lot of networking. We do a lot of training. We work with issues of employment, internships, and we give them a lot of possibilities to do volunteer positions as interns. And the best thing about Finland is that universities do send students and they pay organizations when they give them intern places. That was it. That's my information. If anybody wants to contact later. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What an impressive organization. It's a lot of work, so congratulations.
Thank you.
Questions?
Thank you for that very interesting talk. I'm curious because Finland's kind of an odd place in many ways, and I'm wondering what sort of challenges that you face that are kind of uniquely Finnish, and what challenges you face that are, more broad and applicable around the world.
Yeah, thank you. It was a great question. When the pandemic came, Finnish people are known to stand like already 3 meters away from one another. So when it came, it wasn't a problem for us. And when you are in the country for a long time, you understand that. For me, the number one thing, I think it was more of, I come from a society where people are very oral, people do discuss, families are big, and whatever question you have in mind, stupid or not stupid, you will always have somebody to talk to and to discuss with. So the loneliness was the number one thing that you can't get people to talk to. You are told to learn the language, but then you're like, how can I use the language then if I don't have people to talk to? So I think a lot of migrants face the problem of not having like the native people to talk to. I think that is one of the biggest, but the country is getting better by the year. I've been there for 27 years. I came there when I was like 14 or 13 years old. So in that way, I have seen the change happening. Was a time when I couldn't walk on the streets without somebody throwing something after you, name calling you and stuff like that. And then now you can be anywhere, you can do anything. So that is the thing. But then what we learn from, and what I love about Finland is that we're not one of those countries that rush to do things. We wait. For example, I will call Sweden our laboratory. Like Finland's laboratory is really Sweden. Sweden tries something, and then when Finland looks at, did they make it? Yeah, let's try to do it here. If they didn't, then we learn from it. So it's one thing that I learned is that we use a lot of knowledges and things that people has done before us, and then we try to learn from that. It's very hard to become a friend with a Finnish person, but when you do, you have a friend for life, and they really get you back for that. And what I love about the country is that almost anything you need is kind of like part of the services that is being offered there. You lose an eye, you get help. I remember in just when the refugee crisis was there, a Syrian mother just gave birth. And it was the same time when the president's wife also gave birth in Finland. And they were both in the same place, in the same hospital, at the same section. And the lady wrote that, I'm a refugee. I never even gave birth to a hospital. Now I am like the president of the number one lady of the country, and myself are in the same hospital. We are getting the same services at the moment. So that is how great the country is.
Great story. Other questions?
my question will be like, okay, congratulations and bravo for all this.
Thank you.
While I'm listening to you, I can reflect on my work can be a very few percent of what you do, let's say. But do you have refugee lead initiatives or refugee leaders in leadership position in the organization? And what is the impact that they do? I want to know this because I'm always questioning, is it actually good to have refugee to work for refugee, or to have some outsider that can balance or become like outsider can do better? So I would be happy to know from your understanding. Yeah,
that's really a very great question, because yes, there can never be something for us by others. It has to be for us by us. We have to do it. We have been given that possibility. At the moment, we have an Iraqi, an Ethiopian, and a Somalian in the Finnish parliament. All of them got in the 2019 parliament. In 2015, which was the first time we got migrants in there, we got an Afghani woman and a Turkish young man to get in there. So that is the national level of the country where the migrants are. We have 200 seats, and at the moment now we have 2, an Iraqi and a Somali and an Ethiopian. 3 of them are now in there. When you go to the level of municipalities, for example, only the biggest refugees in Finland were the Somalis before now the Iraqis came. And only in Finland you have 12 members of municipalities. You have 10 members of Arabs, 10 members of Somalis. So we are represented also in the lower part of the government positions. Then when it comes to the organizations, yes, I broke a new glass ceiling when I was elected for this job last year in August of 2020. And there were some really other people who also applied for the same position that I do. And I won that position. And for majority of the people, I really want to believe that I was chosen because of what I know and my background, and not because I happen to be a migrant, because that will, for me, positive discrimination is also one way of discrimination. And I don't see it to be very positive in that way. So we are breaking glass ceilings in here and there in so many different places. But through our organization, one thing that happens is that all the ministerial levels at the moment, whenever and when they're about to do a decision on policies, they will contact an organization like ours and bigger organizations, and we will have the input before it's taken to the parliament, where the opposition or the government will accept it and it will go through. Are we listened to? I wouldn't say 100%, but do we have input? Yes, we do. And one question that I really wanted to add very quickly was about because also this is not volunteer-based organization. We work with a little bit over 1 million euros per year at the moment. And it has not been like that. 10 years ago, we were working with only 100,000 euros. And now in 10 years, we are over 1 million euros. And 10% of the money that we get is meant for our member organization. So let's say a Yazidi organization would like to do a volunteer work through Moniheli. We have the possibilities to support them also financially. We can do that.
Thank you. 2 more questions at the back table.
Thank you very much, Abdirahim, for such a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I was thinking, I just want to bring you back to the local level, and I was very much thinking about outreach. There's no way that you can work with migrants and refugees and not do hardcore outreach, and certainly hardcore outreach cannot take place in spaces like this. You know, it can be quite daunting and intimidating for most of those from our backgrounds and those who identify with us. So from your experience, my question is, who does the outreach, and how do you get to that place where, you know, you're kind of playing a level a level playing field where, you know, the outreach is taking place at both ends rather than just from one?
Yeah, thank you. First, because Finnish language is a very hard language to learn, it takes really long time to understand. And when you're a kid, maybe it's much easier. I came when I was primary school, so it was easier to learn the language for me. But for adults, it really takes like years to master that language. So we made sure that we will take the language card off the topic and off the table, that people can come there and they can, you know, really say out what they want to say and make sure that they say their points out. So to do the outreach, we don't do the work ourselves, but our members do the outreach themselves. We empower them. We give them, let's say this Kurdish organization that is with us, they want to contact the members of their organization, and they will come to me and ask me that, hey, we need to contact them on this and this issue. We need resources. So what I do is I find the resources. The resources might be the place to go, a person to come and talk to them with the statistics from the city level or from the government level. People would have the Palestinian issue might raise up every once in a while. Then we will have to invite the Finnish foreign minister or the foreign office people to come and talk to them about it. We had the Uyghur things happening now in China. There's a lot of discussion about that. People are really getting up. What we do and what our organization is doing, that we bring like the people together. But for doing the outreach, they do it majority. We empower them to do that themselves. Yeah, so we're kind of like a broker, yeah. But we are an NGO, but also a network at the same time. In some part, we are doing project work, and in some, but majority of the work is networking. How to make sure that the people find the right people.
Thank you, Mr. Abdirahim, for your speech. My name is Carl Dahlbeck from Sweden and God's House. I wonder from whom comes the initiative to voluntary work in the start? Is it from the local organizations? Is it FBO, NGOs? Is it from Moniheli that initiate the work for the volunteers?
Well, we have big organizations are always writing on their web pages that, hey, we need volunteers for this and we need volunteers for that. Do you speak that language? Can you do this? Can you do that? And then come and work with us and we will help you. And what happens is that what we have done, for example, is that a lot of refugees from Iraq, from Palestine, from Iraq and other parts of the world, Syria, that came there and that were all given this negative on their refugee status, that they have been in the country for 5 years now without doing nothing. What we as Moniheli do is to make sure that they don't become passive. So we kind of link them with big organizations so they keep on, being active within the society. So a lot of them, by being active and by doing volunteer work, we are able to sell them to the home office that will look at them like, they have gained, they have learned the language, they have done this and that. They deserve to be given the Finnish, papers to stay in the country legally. So through volunteers, it happens. So it happens from both sides. But majority of migrants that come to us don't understand that all of that work they are doing is volunteer work. They just, for them, it's an obligation, helping others and doing all of this kind of thing. They don't see it as something that is volunteerism. But yeah, we make it possible for them, and we kind of, for me, it's very important that whoever comes to us, we make them these certificates to show that they were active. So it helps them through their processes. I don't know if you answered. And when you mentioned Sweden, there's a lot of things that we are learning from Sweden. And one problem now we have that is coming, we're trying to get to understand is when the Brexit happened, a lot of migrants who are living in the UK that used to have the Finnish citizen came back. Their children were like British radicalized. Like, I wouldn't say radicalized like Islamic or anything like that, but they were like in gangs and in so many other things. And Finland is a very small place. So when they came back, now violence within the youth that is coming from, we hear a lot in Sweden and we hear also in UK, is starting to come to Finland. Just last week, my son's friend's mother's brother was shot by another migrant, but he didn't die. He shot him in the stomach, but it woke up the whole community.
Thank you for that. That's a lot of food for thought. You both, I'd like to thank both our speakers.
Can I see?
Please.
Yeah, thank you.
Please. And you'll be here for the discussion. So as we get into discussions, I'd like you to know that there are, other than the speakers, there are Chatham House rules here. So anything that you say will be recorded, as you see cameras everywhere, but it will not be those words will not be attributed to any person in this room in the report. Okay, so with that, I have a series of questions for us to explore. Where we want to get to by the end of tomorrow is 3 policy recommendations. To this end, we start with what we could call a mapping question. And I have to say, there is because of the discussions this morning around what is recognized volunteering and unrecognized volunteering, I'm going to focus on this idea of recognized volunteering that you used as an example, I guess, with the state recognizing the volunteering that is done. I guess the state does not recognize unrecognized volunteer. Okay, so I guess it's the state recognition of volunteering that we're focused on. So what is the current status of migrants and refugees' participation in recognized volunteering work locally in your country? Big, wide open question, but it'd be great to get a feel of how it is on the ground.
Cool. Yeah. So I'm working in Europe level. I'm working in Europe level, but more focused on France. I remember in 2 years ago, we wanted to actually create a network of refugee lead organization, and we didn't find one in France. No, there is no, even in European level, there was like no refugee lead organization. In like, okay, there were few where participated, they have some refugee, but refugee lead organization we didn't have. This says a lot that why a refugee cannot make an organization, because simply he or she, they don't have the equal opportunity than others who actually create. Then it's come to the system, like institutional, let's say. I've been researching all over like France policy. I have found like a huge institutional struggle for refugee. Let me give you one example. We have volunteering, yeah. The volunteering that if we just jump on the word volunteering, you say the volunteering that people do and that refugee do, migrant do, is not the same. Okay? The volunteering that the refugee can get and the other can get is also not the same. You see the huge difference of levels. If you ask, for example, I'm a European, I know the language. I directly have 100 ways of volunteering. But if I am a refugee, no, I will struggle to find one volunteering. This is the difference that I can, yeah. Well, then why is that? Because we have like something is said that we have to adapt. In France, we have a contract. It's called contract of integration, national contract. It's like you have to swear to be integrated. You have to swear to know the language. And this is okay, it's logic. But how about a talented refugee in something else that doesn't really need a French language, you know, human speaking? So this is the difference that I can see in, we have, even in volunteering, you know, if I go I once went to the Paris initiative of volunteering, of cleaning the city and stuff. Like in a low level also, you will have 10 refugees, but one non-refugee with us, he's going to be leading. You know? Yeah. So this is also I can see. Yeah, it happened not only with me, but with others. So I give you this specific example without giving abstract words that explains, but this is the reality that I witness.
Almost the volunteering you're saying is also so linked to the culture and the system of the social contract, if you will, with the country. That's interesting. Comments? How's it where you are?
So about Portugal, and from our context and from the perspective of Miru, actually there is no strong volunteering culture among the society, not only speaking about refugees, but among all the society. We don't have a culture of volunteering that is strong. So it's a path that we are trying to walk. And if it is difficult for local people to enter this kind of volunteering experience, it is much more difficult for refugee people arriving in Portugal to do it. But in our community, we are now working with some families in the north, some refugee families and local people, our volunteers. We have already some nice experiences that prove that this is a path that we should invest in here. We have, for example, a Syrian lady that have been having troubles trying to enter the job market. She was not leading well with stress, not even being able to do an interview with an anxiety. So, and now she started to do volunteering with some homeless people in Porto, and she's being able in this more soft way to be with local people, to speak with Portuguese people, and to deal with tasks that are similar to job tasks. But so it's a way to prepare her to enter the job market. So just an example. And another example, during the pandemic, the first months in a city in the north, Braga, a big solidarity kitchen was created because the cases of homeless people just raised, like in Portugal, and there were like 2 or 3 women from our community working in the kitchen and preparing this meal, and then the men were distributing this. So and they were really, really happy to contribute to the system here in Portugal. And then I know that we are talking about formal volunteering, but we know that there is a strong sense of community between families, and they are permanently helping each other. So we know of Syrian families between themselves. They know when someone is in need, and they are permanently aware of the needs of each other. So I think that this service need is something that is natural, as someone said today morning. So it's just simple.
Actually, just to add, like, I think Finland is like the opposite of Portugal, because like I said earlier, Finns are not very social people. So because of that, it's very important people do volunteer work. For example, you would have the neighborhood volunteer that when the spring ends, that people will come out together one day and clean the whole area together, grill, but then the difference between migrants doing volunteer work and Finns doing volunteer work, almost 7 or 6 out of 10 from the Finns, when volunteer work is done, there's also a budget included in there. Like there's money within that there's someone who will cook the coffee and stuff like that. But then within the migrants, you will see like there's zero budget always. And it's something, like I said, in Finland, people understand that it needs, you can't ask people to come stand out there in the cold and clean out with you, and you won't make them coffee. And then the question is, who's going to pay for the coffee? And then that's how they get the small budgets. Sometimes people add into that, some they put it, but it's out there. The only thing that needs to be made clear to the newcomers when they come in as part of the integration is, if you do volunteer work, it kind of opens many doors for you. I don't think I would have ever been in the position where I am now if I wouldn't have gone through volunteer work and organization work. And by the way, in Finland, every 3 people can create an organization. Every 3 people. In this room now, we could have 16 organizations already, just when we go there. You just have to have a permit to stay in the country. You have to have a social security number and an address, 3 people, and then you can get it. And you can call it whatever you want to call it, as long as there's laws, and then you are following the regulations of the country.
Yeah, I think, well, my perception of what's the situation in Italy, I think it's different from the from the three experience we heard so far. I think that in Italy there is a wide culture of volunteering. I think that so many things wouldn't be running if it wasn't for the volunteering of so many different organizations, communities, and I think kind of from the Sant'Egidio community can support me in that direction. I think there are some other levels I would like to add here to the discussion about volunteering from people from a migrant and refugee background. I think we have seen that happening so much in our project during the COVID-19 pandemic. We have seen people like coming with the resources they had. If it's people that have been staying for quite some time in Italy, they were thinking, okay, and we were all in touch, and it was so powerful to hear this line of reasoning going around. Like, I have something I can share, both economically, both in terms of resource, of other kinds of resources, and that was really impressive. And I think that something else is also related to really the concept we have about volunteering. And what kind of support are we talking about volunteering? And I know in this room we're not talking only about it, but I think that one main question is always, are we talking about volunteering towards other migrants and refugees, or are we talking about supporting the society at a wider level? And I think this is really something important, because there is so often the tendency of keeping also the volunteer side of people from migrant and refugee background within that sphere. But how powerful it is when that goes out, when it's like supporting people, elderly people. And that's where I've seen really the changes happening in the relationship with the wider society. So I think this is something else that we can take into consideration in the reflection.
Thank you, Elena. And I'm going to go here. And can you introduce yourself as well? And I have the second question to add to what you're going to say. What are the obstacles that we see?
So I'm Amina Khalid from the UK, and in the context of the UK, certainly volunteering is there, it's real, it's happening. I'm not sure if we proudly use the term volunteering. I mean, I always find myself that in the sort of like a European context or forums, I hear the term a lot, but within the UK, not so much. And in terms of service, as we've touched a lot about the engagement of refugees and migrants, when it comes to volunteering, actually, you know, we see more of them engaging in that kind of work. I would like to draw your attention back to what Abdirahim was saying earlier on about the two different forms of volunteering. Now, one of the things that I have noticed enormously over the years and being in the field for so long is that when volunteering positions are taken by those from migrants and refugees background, that kind of volunteering often within our context does not translate into an end product of then, you know, having some kind of position within the organization, whether it's a charity organization or anything else. When that volunteering is done by a member of the host, it quickly changes. I find that incredibly problematic. Yeah.
Right, embedded into the whole relationship of mobility.
Absolutely. And I have brought that to the table on a number of occasions and said, well, actually, the offering and the amount of time and commitment that's been given by so and so has been so much greater than the person who just came to be with us a month ago. What is the thing that had enabled you to say this person is more deserving than the next? So that in many ways also respond to your question around the challenges around it. I can't understand that, and it's greatly disturbing.
Absolutely. So discriminatory practices, which is rife across our societies. Yes.
Oh, if I may just add, related to that as well, the other thing is the same job could be done by one from the migrant person, and then the other from a native, and the one done by the native is very easily recognized and so valued instantly. And he said, oh, so and so, my God, they've done X number of hours and put so much effort into this, whereas the next person, the same. Again, going back to what you were saying.
Also, I guess it is varied. I'm also wondering, let's say criminal records checks. Obviously, very different. A lot of volunteering opportunities ask for criminal records checks. Now, this could be close to impossible for refugees and certain migrants to be able to. How is this a thing in your communities, in your countries? Do they require criminal record checks? I'm thinking UK, which I know very well, asks a lot of that, which is a big barrier.
May I? No, just to integrate the picture given to Italy, but not only this. First question is, we have to divide clearly what is voluntary and what is not voluntary, even if it's a social work. It's very important because if, for example, the budget is included, well, this is not voluntary work. It's it's a very important work, but it's not voluntary. And this is a confusion that in Italy, for example, is very, very, used. They don't think that there is quite a strict division between the two aspects. It's true that I think that speaking about not voluntary, social work, which is not voluntary, I agree with Amina when she said that sometimes it is under considered the work of, for example, I give you an example in Italy, and I think it's just in Italy and not in other countries, but tell me if I'm wrong. The social work in family, attending, supporting the family in assisting not self-sufficient elderly people is given by, foreign people. And it was very important in our society because it solved a very big social problem in 10 years. But it's not very clearly recognized by the society. There's just, suspect around this, even by a very open organization who, for example, trade unions or so on. And that is, in my mind, it is a certain, discrimination of the value of the work of the foreign people. I think that for voluntary work, especially voluntary work, I think it's very important. For example, the example of my organization is that when it's possible, we immediately propose to refugees to help us in helping other people, like poor people, for example, distributing food in the street. And because there is I know how they live in the refugee camp. I knew people who stayed, young people who stayed 10 years in refugee camp doing absolutely nothing. And I think that there is a strong will to be useful to the people, but there must be a certain integration. A certain integration is required.
So is there a pathway that's needed that they don't recognize the pathways? What's the issue of why?
They must be when I say there is a certain integration is required, is that, for example, they have to know the language, they have to they have to solve some very immediate problems when they of course integrate in a new society. So and that's important. But in the meanwhile, there is also special task given from refugee people. For example, language. I am responsible for the program of humanitarian corridor in Ethiopia, and previous refugees are helping me in Addis Ababa to interview refugees that we bring. They integrate themselves in the society, and then they want to give back what they received previously. That's, I think
it makes for a
very
better
important
product anyway. I just, Lawrence, you're okay. So Lawrence, just raise your hand if you have anything you want to add. Everybody's looking at you on the screen, so you're very much a presence here. Okay. We're going to conclude quite shortly. So if there's any last burning obstacles, what we're going to do here, we've been taking notes, which we'll carry on to tomorrow, which is when we will we'll start narrowing things down, and we'll have a series of questions. But first,
well,
can you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Carl Dahlbeck. I'm from Sweden, God's House. First of all, I think it's very fundamental that we see refugees as human resources. First of all, they are not a problem, they are resources for our work, because that's the ground value. If you don't do that, we can't create any structures, we can't get people to come to the right. We can't see people as object. There must be subject for us when we look at them. So I think when we not see people as resources, there will be no voluntary work. That's what I'm saying.
So, and Ibrahim.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks to everyone. It's been really educational to hear all your different experiences. I just wanted to ask a question, if anyone can answer, maybe from Finland, Italy, Portugal, Sweden even. Is there a difference in the volunteering possibilities between civil society organizations and faith-based organizations like churches, mosques, temples, and synagogues? Is it relatively easier and more recognized through a faith institution compared to a civil society institution?
I don't know if it's going to be answered right now, or there is a question to carry on to tomorrow. We have just about 5 minutes, so to tell you about tomorrow, we will have breakout groups, but to discuss a series of questions. Now, I'm cheating and I'm going to give you the questions beforehand, but it goes with and if you haven't seen it, it's a input paper. It may have been sent to you, but I ask you that please look at it over tonight, and with these questions, it'll make things move a lot quicker tomorrow, where time is very tight. So, sorry. Any last questions, comments? The process clear? Please.
I had a question that we may not have time to get an answer today, but it was because I was approached some weeks ago by a colleague in Ireland who I know wanted to develop a volunteering project around environmental protection or support, cleaning up cities, etc. And I said to him, you know, it sounds good, but have you talked to refugees about this? Because refugees in Ireland face enormous pressures and are unable to work. They're left in limbo, given a very small amount of money every month. And one question I have in my mind, which you may be able to answer, is to what extent are refugees actually starting to resent the way they're being treated by some European countries? I know in Portugal and Finland, it sounds like the government is very supportive, but is that a barrier to them volunteering if they have a sense of grievance against the situation that they're put in?
We'll put that as a final.
I think that is one of the most important questions today. Also, the other question asked by Ibrahim. For this one, I will have to think about it yet. But for your question, for example, on the integration, when some of the policymakers they put on social media asking questions like, "Hey, we are doing the policy making for integration, this and that issue. What do you think? Like, could you have some input?" So migrant background people are asked to join in for free to help people who are paid, to help them come up with ideas of what to do with their job. And I'm very glad because I know some of my Russian friends who are really very highly educated. They are very aware and they follow that. And they kind of send almost everyone I know a message saying that, don't you give them any input. Because if they're hired for positions where they don't have the idea to do that job, then that's not their job. It's for the government to understand to hire the right people for those positions. So that is one point. And then number two, yes, everyone who comes up with an idea, let's say there's a lady in Finland who decided 10 years ago she wanted to do cleaning the streets. And she has been in the president's presence many times where she has been given the White Cross of the Year. This is something that is given once a year. For all the initiatives migrants do on volunteer work, you never see any migrants being really awarded because of what they have done. But a Finnish lady will do something or a Finnish man will do something, and 2-3 years later, you will see them really compensated with names and everything else, which is not fair. So yes, it really bugs me personally because there's a lot of professionals who really should be getting compensated for the job they do, but they're asked to do it voluntarily. And the resentment can be seen through different people. Yes, it does exist. And for the question that about the churches and mosques, it's really crazy that we can have people to come and do volunteer for work, and it will be looked as volunteer work. Sometimes it will even be paid for after they do or for a while, but you can't send them to the mosque to do those jobs, to do those volunteer works, and it will not be counted, which is crazy. And it is that way in Finland. I don't know about the other countries.
Yes, I wonder if the state recognizes integration into a host community of co-religionists rather than this kind of central space of the majority. So ending now, first, thank you, Lawrence, for being with us. Thank you all for your active participation. I hope you will be here tomorrow because that's when the real work starts. We'll be discussing, I'm going to be passing out a brief and questions to you. And we are here bright and early, I believe. We have a plenary tomorrow. And then right in this room right after. I'm just checking to see if there's anything else. I invite you at 4:30 to visit the Human Library session in the plenary room. It's scheduled after the break, so 4:30. And with that, thank you for your involvement. Thank you, Tech and Mike, for all your help. And we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.